Ladies and gentlemen, Dr. Timothy McKnight.
Good evening, everybody. Welcome to the summary of week 7. I hope you're able to watch the presentation this weekend about food labels. So we're going to do a review of that tonight. And before we get to that, I wanted to show you, an inspirational piece. I mentioned that I try to share you something of an inspiration and something to make you smile. I ran out of time to give you a joke or a funny picture, but I did find a video that I've shown before in class that I absolutely love. This is the idea that it doesn't matter how old we are, we can always achieve more than we physically thought possible if we commit to a little bit of movement. I came across this woman on YouTube several years ago, and her video is just really inspirational to me, so I thought I'd share it with you. She's a German gymnast, and she is 92 years old.
Der Aufenthalt hat mich überwältigt und ich bin glücklich, dass ich das geschafft habe und ich hätte nie gedacht, dass sowas auf mich zukommt.
I'm actually really overwhelmed and absolutely happy. I never thought that I would ever be able to do anything like this, so it's a really, really exhilarating experience.
Ich habe als Kind schon geturnt, ich war sportlich tätig als Lehrer und ich habe seit 30 Jahren wieder angefangen, wettkampfmäßig zu turnen.
I've actually always been very sporty, even as a child, and then as I grew older, I became a PE teacher, and then about 30 years ago, I started actively competing in championships again.
It's absolutely fantastic and it's unbelievable.
So I think we'll stop it there. But this woman just inspires me. And so I hope that you got the sense that it doesn't matter how old you are, you can always become more athletic. And if you don't give up on your dreams and you just keep moving. So I'll show you some more of those type of videos in the future. But I love what this woman is doing at the age of now 92, probably since then closer to her mid-90s, 94, 95. So we're going to talk, we're going to briefly review some of the highlights of the food label presentation, but I came across 2 articles today. I get journals that pile up on my desk, and before I throw them out, I go through and I see if there's anything relevant to what I'm doing as family practitioner or with Fit for Life. And I came across 2 articles today from the Journal of the American Medical Association. When I saw these, I smiled. I thought, you guys have to see this because this is what we've been talking about. So let me show you the first one that I came across. This was a study just published this year in the Journal of American Medical Association. It was entitled "The Effect of Out-of-Hospital Sodium Nitrite on Survival to Hospital Admission After Cardiac Arrest." In other words, what they were doing in this study is patients who were having a cardiac arrest in the field, not in the hospital, in the field. The squad is called, someone's down with cardiac arrest. Let's give them sodium nitrite and see if that helps them survive any longer. So this is along the lines of nitric oxide, and they're giving sodium nitrite. So let me show you this study. There were 2 groups. One was given 205 people were randomly assigned into these two groups. One group of 205 were given 45 grams of IV nitrite. The other group was given an IV placebo. And then we were studying the outcomes. And the conclusion is that the administration of this nitrite did not significantly improve survival to a hospital admission. So there was no difference between the treatment group with the nitrite and the placebo group. And the question is, why not? And the next question that I want you to think about is, where is nitrite converted into nitric oxide? And if you remember what we've talked about in class, when we eat foods that have nitrates in them and we chew them up in our mouth, the nitrate is released from these green leafy vegetables and converted into nitrite by the bacteria in our mouth. When we then swallow the nitrite and it gets into our stomach acid converts it to nitric oxide, which then dilates blood vessels. It enhances blood flow everywhere, to the brain, to the genitals, to the heart, to the lungs. So it helps us in every respect. Any place you need blood flow, nitric oxide is there to make sure it happens. So can you see why this study might have concluded that there was no benefit? Because what they lacked was the acid environment that converted nitrite to nitric oxide. This was strictly given in the bloodstream. This should have produced no effects. Yet this was published in one of the most respected medical journals in the world. And I marvel at this whole this method, because it clearly, I would have said, this is going to do nothing, because nitrite doesn't do anything. Nitrite has to be converted to nitric oxide in an acid environment, and the stomach or the blood is not acidic, it's slightly alkaline. Another study, this was showing the effect of high-dose omega-3 fatty acids versus corn oil on major adverse cardiovascular events in patients at high cardiovascular risk. Now, this was published last year in JAMA at the end of the year. So let me explain what this study was trying to do. They used 13,000 participants in 22 different countries. It was double-blind, a double-blind random placebo trial. So this is perfect. These are the most robust study designs that are available for research. So it was well studied, a lot of participants. All of these participants were on statins, and all of them had known coronary artery disease. So what we did in one treatment group is we told them, you're going to take 4 grams a day of omega-3 fatty acids. Now, just think about what that means. That's 4 big gel caps of fish oil, virtually a teaspoon of fish oil if you're taking it in a liquid form like I did when I was taking this. The other group was a control group, and they were just given corn oil. Now, you should know that corn oil by now is very high in omega-6 fatty acids. So this probably is not the best control group, because theoretically, this control group high in omega-6 fatty acids might potentially make the cardiovascular outcomes worse, because corn oil is very inflammatory. The conclusion, this is straight from the study, there were no significant differences in major cardiovascular events. Okay, so now we talked about the fact that omega-3 fatty acids are good and that they can help improve lipid profiles. But what we're looking at here is not the changes in the cholesterol profile. We're looking at the outcomes of cardiovascular events, heart attacks. And so there was no difference between the two groups. And then the conclusion, these findings do not support the use of this omega-3 formulation to reduce major cardiovascular events in high-risk patients. So that essentially, it's not going to matter if you give these patients omega-3 fatty acids. It doesn't seem to curb these cardiovascular events. So my question is, what do you think about this? How much does 5 grams of omega-3 fatty acids lower cholesterol? Now, you may not remember this, but I did this study on myself. And I showed you this, I think, in week 5. My LDL, or bad cholesterol, was 152. after several months of a 5-gram a day fish oil, which was a teaspoon of fish oil, my LDL cholesterol dropped 14 points. Now, this is an N. This is a study of one person, so you can't really extrapolate too much. But I did have a reduction in my cholesterol, but it wasn't astounding. It wasn't earth-shattering. But when I changed my diet, it was very significant. When I went to a more of a plant-based diet and I got rid of the omega-3 fats and I got rid of the carbohydrates and I was able to lose weight, my cholesterol levels came down pretty nicely. So what are the other issues here? What are some of the other factors that might make you suspect that they weren't going to see a difference? What else could they have measured? Could they have measured C-reactive protein levels? Could there have been a difference with C-reactive protein? You also have to remember that these people with known cardiovascular disease, this is a progressive inflammatory problem. And is fish oil, 4 large 1,000 milligram capsules a day, is that enough to make a difference with these patients? And I'm not really surprised, because it's only one piece of the puzzle. There's so many other factors. They could have looked at nitric oxide. They could have looked at C-reactive protein, homocysteine levels. They could have looked at a lot of other markers of inflammation to predict who's going to do poorly or who won't. But again, this control group was probably not the best control group, because this is an inflammatory oil, the corn oil. So one other interesting finding, I looked at the back of this article at the very conclusion, and I found this. There was a conflict of interest between the primary author of this study, who had financial ties to all these pharmaceutical companies. So right there, you're introducing a bias that's hard to negate. It's hard to remove that bias in an author who's benefiting by all these pharmaceutical companies. And this is mainstream, well-respected medical science that many of my colleagues are following. So this is, I think, although the design was good, the treatment, I think, was not expected to do much, and the control group was flawed. And of course, the conflict of interest is a concern for me as well. So I just thought these were two really interesting studies that illustrate that nitric oxide is on the forefront of people's minds, but many of our scientists and many of our researchers don't even understand the basic physiology or chemistry of nitric oxide, that it's not expected to do much in the blood. You have to convert nitrite to nitric oxide in the stomach, where nature wants it to be converted. And those people should have been screened for whether or not they were taking proton pump inhibitors or acid blockers, because that would have clearly affected the outcome. And of course, this study with cardiovascular outcomes with omega-3 fatty acids has its limitations as well. This was really not a useful study, nor was it really well thought out in my mind. So let's highlight some of the points from this week's topic on food labels. So let's jump right into a couple of the main points. First of all, the food labels provide nutritional information, but they can be misleading. And remember, they're marketing a product, and they're trying to sell you something that often this particular food may not be the most conducive to optimal health. And when it comes to food labels, the more you read, the better you'll get at it. So I ask you to get a food label and to look at it and to ask yourself a few questions. Is this a good food choice? Was it easy to answer the question? And what am I struggling with when it comes to looking at a food label and understanding it? So this was a preparatory exercise to help you become ready to learn this topic as it was presented. So on this example that we walk through, we were looking at basic 4 whole grain cereal, and we were analyzing the food label on this cereal to decide if this should be something we keep in our cart as we're pushing it through the grocery store. So these are all the different elements of the food label. We went over those each in detail. The first is the serving size, and just a couple points on the serving size. There's no standard for what constitutes a serving size. Different cereals, for example, will have different serving sizes. So you have to be aware of what that is. The next point that I was making is that we're looking at calories, which is probably not as critical as you might think, because it's not really calories that determine whether you gain weight. It's carbohydrates, because you should know by now that carbohydrates turn on your fat-making machinery. They make you more hungry. So these were some of the things that we talked about in this slide. And whoops, let me go back to it just so I can highlight the key point here. First, that our calories from fat, when I presented this, you can see that it says that we should limit it to 30% of our calories should come from fat. Well, this is according to the American Dietetic Association, which I don't agree with. If you do 30% from fat, according to their recommendations, and say 15% of your calories from protein, then you're going to have 55% of your calories from carbohydrates. And that is not conducive to maintaining your weight. So I think this is flawed. Some of the experts in this field that I've followed and the courses that I've attended, they recommend much more fat, as much as 50% of our calories coming from fat. Fat does not make us fat. Fat makes us feel satiated. It makes us feel full. It doesn't have any impact on insulin. It doesn't stimulate ghrelin to make us hungry. It doesn't activate or diminish the role of leptin, which makes us feel satisfied. And when you're trying to remember the conversion of grams of fat to calories, the simplest conversion, if you need to do this, is essentially 1 gram of fat, 1 pat of butter is equal to 10 calories. So try to make the math easy. Don't make it a 1 gram per 9 calories. Okay, the next portion that we talked about was fat, cholesterol, and sodium. And these are listed next in order because we tend to think, or at least the American Dietetic Association tends to think that these are bad, that we need to limit these. So they kind of put these in as a caution. And we're seeing the amounts that this particular food had, 1 serving of the Basic 4 cereal. So the goal is, again, according to the American Dietetic Association, is to keep our total fat intake less than 30% of our total calories. Again, I disagree with this. I think this should be much higher. Our total cholesterol should be less than 300 milligrams a day. Well, you should know by now, hopefully you know, that your liver makes cholesterol. If you don't eat it, your liver is going to make it, because that's where you get your steroid hormones, which keeps us robust and strong and active. And of course, sodium intake does need to be monitored because we're trying to avoid excessive sodium. And then a little bit more on fat. Now, see, this slide is probably a little bit off, because saturated fat should be, according to the American Dietetic Association, should be about 10% of our total daily calories. And I put less than 7%. I'm not sure what that number should be. This is splitting hairs. This is not really that important. 10%, 15%, 7%. The more saturated fat you have in the diet, the more animal flesh you're eating. And I think meat is something that we don't have to avoid, but we should be careful that we don't eat it too much. The most important component of this slide is that if a food label says there are 0 grams of trans fat in it, legally, it only means that there's less than 0.5 grams of trans fat. So you can have a little trans fat, but on the label, make note that there's no trans fat. So in this particular label, what you're seeing up here in this Basic 4 cereal, in 1 serving, that there's 0 grams of trans fat. That could mean that there is, in 1 serving, there may be 0.45 grams of trans fat. So you can see that we're being just a little bit misled, because they know that we are trying to limit trans fats in our diet. Many of us don't know why, but we know trans fats are bad. So they're trying to use these tricky little definitions sometimes to hide the truth from us. Then we talked about another label that says there's no trans fat. So if you look in this bag of Doritos, it says no grams of trans fat. Now, if you want to figure out, is this really true, you look at the ingredients list. When you look at the ingredients list, it's right there. Partially hydrogenated soybean oil. Partially hydrogenated or hydrogenated is another way of saying trans fat. So this actually does have trans fat in it. It's not a lot, so it's less than 0.5 grams, but it's there. So we're still being a little bit misled. And if they had listed trans fat on the nutrition facts table, you might have put that back on the shelf because of your concern that this is bad. But they're being full disclosure. They're telling you partially hydrogenated, but most consumers don't realize that that means a trans fat. Okay, I'm going to try to be patient and let my slides catch up with me here, and hopefully we don't have some of the problems we've had in the past. It seems like it's struggling here. We talked about these cautions of sodium, and most nature's foods gives us adequate sodium. When we start adding sodium to our diet, that's when we get into trouble. And canned foods and processed foods contain a lot of sodium, and the reason that we add sodium into our foods is because it acts as a preservative, but it also acts as a natural flavor enhancer. So we have to be really careful. Processed foods, packaged foods are going to be higher in sodium than what we really want. Okay, next slide. We'll talk about total carbohydrates. This basic 4 cereal, one serving, has 15% of our total needs. There's 44 grams of carbohydrates. Now, if you've been listening to what I'm saying with regards to weight loss, and I'm telling you that if you want to lose weight, your target carbohydrate intake should be 50 grams a day or less of carbohydrates. That means one serving of basic 4 cereal almost meets your carbohydrate intake for the day. That means you don't have any room for berries. You don't have really much room for not even too many vegetables, certainly not beans, not green beans, and certainly not corn, which is high in starch and carbohydrates. So you have to be careful. But this is also concerning because on this list, there are 13 grams of sugars and 72 grams of other carbohydrate. Now, what in the world does that mean? The total carbohydrate intake, according to the American Dietetic Association, is 50 to 60% of our total calories. That's an awful lot of carbohydrates. If you're eating a lot of whole raw vegetables, you're not going to need that percentage of carbohydrate in your diet. So to get that many carbohydrates, you're probably eating breads and pastas and rice and potatoes and other starches. And that's way, way too much. So for weight loss, I recommend that 20 up to 25% of our calories come from carbs, mostly from vegetables and berries. So automatically, you should recognize that having a bowl of this cereal with an effort to lose weight is going to be very difficult. We also talked about dietary fiber, and we investigated this sugars part of the label a little bit deeper. So 13 grams of sugar. There is no clear definition on any food label on what type of sugar that is. That could be honey, that could be the agave nectar, that could be high fructose corn syrup, or corn syrup, which is another name for high fructose corn syrup. So we can get very confused with this. It could be table sugar or sugar cane. And then other carbohydrates, that also leaves us wondering, what in the world is that? Well, normally that is a reference to refined or enriched carbohydrates, which are nutrient deficient, and they cause your blood sugar to go up and they cause your insulin level to raise. But this can also be a source of other sugars that become hidden in this food label. So with regards to understanding carbohydrates and sugar content on a food label, it's very nebulous. It's very unclear. It's very difficult to decipher exactly what's there. And it's kind of intended to be that way. And then we talked about net carbs. And net carbs is an interesting topic. and I'm having this problem again with advancing my slides, and I don't know why. Let's see if I can go back here. Okay, net carbs. So net carbs are not defined by the FDA. The weight control and food industry defines net carbs as essentially carbohydrates that provide calories. So dietary fiber up here you see is considered as a carbohydrate source. There's 4 grams of dietary fiber, but that provides no calories. So that's part of the mathematical equation. So you have the total carbs minus the fiber, which provides no calories, minus sugar alcohols, which provide no calories, and you get the net carbs. So essentially the net carbs are sugars and starches, and everything else is a non-caloric carbohydrate, like a sugar alcohol or a fiber. Okay, and then we talked a little bit about other sugars and sugar alcohols and carb. Here's an example of a Carb Smart diet or Carb Smart ice cream bar. This Klondike bar. I am really sorry. I'm still struggling with these slides to advance them, and I can't quite figure out what's happening here. Back to the sugar alcohols. You'll see these in sugarless products. You'll find these in sugar-free or low-sugar ice cream. You'll find these alcohol groups like xylitol and sorbitol and sugarless gum. So they provide a chemical structure that tastes like sugar on our tongue, but it provides no calories. So here we're back to this Carb Smart ice cream, this Breyer's chocolate ice cream. It says 4 grams of net carbs. And what does that mean? Well, you have to do the math. And if you look at the nutrition facts, you should be able to do the math. It's the definition I gave you in the previous slide. The total carbohydrates, which is 10, based on the nutrition facts table on the right, minus dietary fiber, which is 1, minus the sugar alcohols, which is 4. And the difference there, if you do the math, the difference is 5. Now, for some reason, they rounded down to make it 4 grams of net carbs. I'm not sure how they do that because the math doesn't quite add up. But they're basically saying in one serving of this Carb Smart Breyer's ice cream, you have 4 grams of carbohydrates that have calories. The next one, fortunately, the math does add up. This is a Carb Smart ice cream bar. So 5 grams, if you do the math here, it adds up. So 5 grams of calories that will raise your insulin and stimulate weight gain and fat synthesis. So this clearly is a better choice for a diabetic. It's a better choice for anyone trying to lose weight, but it's not the smartest choice because there's still a lot of carbs. So I think the take-home message here is we still need to be careful. And we talked about all these different ingredients. And to me, it's just fascinating that we have so much in ice cream. Many of you have made homemade ice cream, and a homemade ice cream recipe is pretty simple. But if you're making homemade ice cream, you'll know that it usually tastes pretty icy and it gets pretty hard. If you want to remove the ice and the crystal-like texture from ice cream, you add these trying to think of the word for them. Dietary fibers like cellulose, guar gum, carabine, and carrageenan. And what they do is they bind the water molecules and remove it essentially from the ice cream, so it makes it smoother and more creamy. And we go to protein. Protein is a good source of energy. It helps you build muscle. We talked about this in our class, I think, last week. You should have been able to calculate how much protein that you need. This is just a reminder that your daily protein needs for most of us are 0.4 to a half gram per pound ideal body weight. So if your ideal body weight is 180 pounds, you need anywhere from 45 to 90 grams of protein a day. That's a pretty wide range. And some of it depends on factors like, are you recovering from a trauma or surgery when you're trying to build structures and tissue back where your protein needs would be higher? Are you actively exercising where you're building new muscle and you need the higher end of this range? But the point I tried to make last week is that we don't have to eat a lot of animal products to help meet our protein needs. Again, I'm not promoting a vegetarian diet. I'm just saying we don't need a 12-ounce steak at a steakhouse. That's more protein than what we should have in any one sitting. The next area we talked about is vitamins and minerals. Now, this will not appear on a food label unless the food vendor is trying to brag about the nutritional components of the vitamins and minerals in their product. And in this case, this Basic Force cereal has an excellent source of vitamins and minerals. Most of these because of the Enrichment Act. Most of these because they were forced to add these back as part of the law that was established in 1942, I believe. A little bit more on the food label, that if this is a food that we're going to usually have milk with it, that'll give us an additional update on the contribution of a given quantity of milk with the food, particularly with cereals. And then the ingredient list. Now, you should know that this is usually listed by rank order of the most prevalent ingredients by weight. And so whole grain wheat is the most prevalent ingredient in this in Basic Force cereal. But as you look down through the first 3 or 4 lines, what you're seeing are a lot of words that look like sugar. And it does have a lot of sugar. It has 44 grams of sugar or starches in one serving, almost meeting your entire carbohydrate need for the day. More importantly, or more concerning, is that this sugar is a simple sugar, and a bowl of this sugar is going to spike your insulin level way up. And that's going to turn on your fat-making machinery. It's going to wake up and stimulate ghrelin, that hormone in your brain that makes your stomach growl with hunger. So you're going to eat this, and 3 or 4 hours after you have this cereal, you're going to be starving again because of the effects of sugar and what it does on your brain and what it does to insulin levels. Finally, there's a caution here about allergies, food allergies, and that's usually the last portion of the label. And struggling again with the slide. So if we see if we can get this slide to advance, because we're stuck. Okay. Here's a great example of a food that many of us like, and it's pretty instructive. So if I can make the point here that wheat thins, again, as you look at this, at the cover of this box, you see the wheat kernels. You see this natural wheat that's in a field. It looks like it would be healthy for us. The name wheat sounds healthy. But then as you look at the nutrition facts and you start assessing this a little bit closer, you're seeing that one serving, which is 16 crackers, has 22 grams of carbohydrates. Again, that's almost a half of your daily need of carbohydrates if you're trying to lose weight. And it's got sugar in it. So probably something that we need to be cautious of. I have a new laptop, and I'm concerned that maybe the way it's converted my PowerPoints has some kind of flaw in it that's not allowing me to advance the slides, or not allowing me to be sure where I am, because I have no control over the advancing the slides at this point. There's absolutely nothing I can do.
Dr. McKnight, try to use the arrows on your keyboard instead of your mouse.
Okay. Let's see if that helps me. Oh, well, that did something. This is another fun one to look at, the Pop-Tarts option. You can see this is colorful, 0 grams of trans fats, which means it could still have trans fat in it, cholesterol free. Well, who cares at this point? It's going to be full of sugar. It's going to be full of, it's got soybean oil and palm oil, which are very inflammatory, high in omega-6s. It's got food dyes in it. That's a problem. It's loaded with corn syrup and sugar, and that's going to stimulate your feeding center as well as your insulin release. Okay, let's see if this will go to the next one. Okay, these are just some points to remember about food labels. What you should remember when you read the food labels, how it's broken down, what are the health claims. Whoops. Let me make sure, I'm sorry, I'm so sorry. Let me make sure that I didn't skip anything as we went through this presentation. Oh, I did skip a couple really important points here. All right, let me see if I can, well, even that's giving me difficulty here from the current slide. Yeah, it's not letting me control this at all. Not from the pad, not from the arrows on the keyboard, and not from the bottom here. Okay, food label smart. This is just a summary. I'm not going to read this, but we already talked about this in our presentation on that we provided for you earlier in the week. And then remember, after all this is said and done, packaged foods are generally to be avoided, and there's several reasons. They almost always are high in hydrogenated or partially hydrogenated trans fats because this prolongs the shelf life of the food. This is exactly what you want as a food manufacturer. You want this food to taste the same the day it's made and even a year after it's been manufactured and shipped out. So you put hydrogenated trans fats in the food so that these fats don't become rancid and it maintains its taste. But this hydrogenation process is not natural, it's not found in nature, and we pay a price with our health and our biochemistry. We also know that these packaged foods are usually rich in sugars because we like them. They're addictive, they please us. We're going to want to go back and buy more and more, and that's what the manufacturer wants. And these foods are very inflammatory. They lead to obesity. These packaged foods also tend to have enriched flour, which are nutrient depleted. We've talked about that a number of times. They often have food dyes and artificial sweeteners whose long-term safety profile we don't really know yet. And more than likely, they're not healthy for us, that they have potential dangerous outcomes. They also tend to be low in fiber. Our gut does not want low fiber foods. Our gut wants fibers, foods that are rich in fiber, so that we can move what we're trying to excrete out quickly and have plenty of bulk with water in it so it's easier to pass the bowel movements. Packaged foods are also to be avoided because they're dead. They have no enzymes in them. And these enzymes that are in live foods help us digest the food and extract the nutrients from them more completely. Nature's foods with these live enzymes that help us, again, digest the food are very good for us. They help in the digestive process. So these packaged foods are easy and convenient substitutes for what nature has provided for us, but they typically take more time and effort to prepare. So it's much quicker to go through a drive-through or pick up a TV dinner or a frozen meal and throw it in the microwave than it is to take something out of the garden or from the produce section of the store and make it into a tasty meal that we can all enjoy. So hopefully these are some of the outcomes that you got from our presentation: understanding how to read a food label, how to break it down, understanding what a health claim is and what's considered a healthy food, And hopefully you feel more comfortable looking at a food label. And in the back of the journal, there is a section where it's a quick guide to looking at food labels. So that was put there intentionally to help you as you're at the store. You got this in your purse or your pocket. You can pull it out and look at it as you're struggling to interpret something on a food label. Okay, so I'm going to try to stop this so that I can entertain questions. Okay, does anybody have any questions tonight? Would you prefer that we use Splenda in our coffee, tea, or a single teaspoon of sugar? I would say sugar, Paul, because Splenda, I think we've alluded to this in the past. Splenda is not natural. It's believed by some people to be neurotoxic, and nature created sugarcane for us to use. So I think table sugar is okay. I just think we have to be careful with it. But clearly, to me, sugar or these natural sugars, agave nectar, honey, is going to be a much better choice than Splenda. Kelly, do you have any other questions?
No, Paul did make a statement. He said, I see why intermittent fasting is important to lower weight loss and carb intake. He's succeeding very well with the intermittent fasting.
Okay. Excellent. Yeah. Intermittent fasting is so powerful because not only does it help us lower the insulin level that's turning on the fat making machinery, but more importantly, it's controlling our brain chemistry. It's telling ghrelin that's making us growl with hunger that we're not going to let you have an impact on us. With intermittent fasting, you drive that hormone down so you lose your hunger. And you drive up the hormone leptin that's released from your gut, which says, I'm satisfied. That is a really powerful hormonal change that happens with intermittent fasting. And again, it should not just be 18-hour fast all the time. We need to fool the body. We need to do a 24-hour fast, a 36 or 48-hour fast. And for some of you, it's overwhelming to consider that. But the more you do that, you'll find that it's not that hard to do. You really do lose your appetite when you stop eating. And what I tried to share with you, I think last week, was we have the research that tells us that intermittent fasting, which is almost a semi-starvation approach, there is no loss of muscle mass. It's actually maintained. And there is no loss of your metabolic rate or metabolism. It's actually enhanced. So it's perfect. And to me, it mimics nature. It mimics how people would have lived 200 years ago when food wasn't guaranteed every 4 hours. And that's how we're designed to thrive and live. We don't have to eat all the time. And isn't it great that if food isn't available and you're living, on the frontier, that you're not going to be hungry for maybe a couple of days, that you'll be able to overcome that. The question about how much portion of our diet is raw produce, I think that really is dependent on what you're able to do. Some people really struggle with this because they don't like vegetables at all. I don't love vegetables, but I can eat them. I can eat just about anything that's good, but some people just have an aversion. So I would say eat as many vegetables as you can. If you cannot tolerate raw vegetables, then steam them or bake them, whatever you have to do, but do as much as you can. Try to find that at least on the 2 meals that you may be eating a day, that half of your plate is full of some form of vegetable. And just remember that when you heat vegetables up, the longer and the hotter the heat that's applied, the more you destroy the antioxidants that are there without disrupting any of the other nutritional components. So you can, if you're doing that, if you're heating it, because that's the only way you tolerate it, then you can get your antioxidants from berries and other fruits. You can get them from beans and nuts and seeds. So there's other places to get those antioxidants, but vegetables are an excellent source. So I would say just do the best you can. I'll also say that vegetables are not very filling. I usually have a pretty big salad every day, and it doesn't hold me over that long. So I have to have a handful of nuts and seeds later in the day to get me through. But don't be afraid to put fat on it. Use an avocado or half of an avocado, or put a lot of salad dressing on it. I don't think that's the worst thing you can do, especially if you're using something in olive oil, which is going to be a very healthy fat. No,
Do you have assignments?
assignments. Yes, the assignments are in the presentation that we recorded on Sunday. I can't remember right off the top of my head. Next week, we're going to be switching, and we're going to be talking about fitness. And so our next lecture will be about flexibility. This is huge, ladies and gentlemen. This is huge. I saw someone in the office the other day who was struggling with lots of musculoskeletal problems, and I had wished I got a hold of her 20 years before she came in. To understand the role of flexibility and how to keep the spine aligned and the muscles toned and the tight muscles stretched is absolutely critical. I can't overemphasize this enough. This is about managing, controlling, preventing headaches, back pain, shoulder pain, low back pain, piriformis syndrome, which is that sciatic pain that many of you suffer from. Flexibility is going to be huge, and you're going to see how the way this is presented, you'll see that this is what nature intended for us. So I will give sort of the background information on flexibility, and then we will have our guest lecturer, Coach Hartzell, who will demonstrate flexibility at the age of 81 now, I think, and you'll be impressed with him because he's much like this gymnast that we watched at the beginning of the class tonight. After we finish talking about flexibility, we'll move into cardiovascular fitness, which does not mean you have to be running or jogging. We're going to help you understand how cardiovascular fitness increases your metabolism and reduces your risk of heart disease and stroke and other chronic diseases. And then we'll talk about strength training and the important role of having our muscles toned and our posture optimal. We'll show you how to maintain and develop those strong toned muscles so that you look fit and young and vibrant. And then we'll also talk about back pain. Dr. Jakubowski will present part of this lecture on back pain and how to manage that more effectively. These are topics that all of you have probably dealt with at some point or will deal with, and that's why they're in these lectures, because I've seen these problems over and over again in the office. And I just feel so bad for people that have struggled for so long. Bad for people who have had shoulder pain and have not had complete physical therapy to correct it. I've been through some of this myself and I understand it. So we're really going to try to help you with all of these components of fitness, because I want you all to be more fit. I want you to all to move more than you're moving now, and to find activities that you enjoy moving. And most of all, I want you to be more pain-free. So we're going to teach you how to do that. This is really, really important. And I really look forward to this the next couple of weeks. So if there's no other questions, I guess we'll end just a little bit early. I want to thank you for being on tonight. Again, I hope you're watching the presentations that we release on Sunday morning. I hope you're staying connected to what we're providing you on Facebook. We will keep adding some videos this week. So please check in periodically to make sure you're not missing anything that might be really pertinent or valuable or important for you and your health and the questions that you have. So have a great evening, and we look forward to seeing you next week.